Angel Green is a senior instructional strategist here at ELearning Interactions in our Tampa studio, where she is responsible for providing consultation and instructional design expertise to clients, partnering to build engaging interactive learning experiences. Angel has worked for organizations such as IBM, MetLife, and PricewaterhouseCoopers, and holds both MS and BS degrees from Florida State University. An accomplished speaker, Angel has held positions as an adjunct instructor of public speaking and is past president of Toastmasters. And with that, I will turn things over to Angel.
Hello there and welcome. I'm so excited to be here today, and thank you, Carrie, for the introduction. I really appreciate everybody taking time out of your day to join us, and I'm excited to discuss techniques and best practices that we at ELearning Interactions use when designing blended learning solutions. My goal today is to share with you all some real-life examples and some tips that you can use when designing your blended learning programs. Today is about practical application and not about theory. Therefore, I'm going to try to avoid a lot of the research about how people learn, and for certain, I'm not going to touch that heated topic in our industry right now, learning styles. But we're going to focus on application. So what we will explore is, when does it make sense to blend? How to blend? What is that right modality mix in the sea of modalities that are available to you? How do you make those decisions? And then we'll move into some design principles that we believe you should be using when you create meaningful and memorable learning. As I go through the webinar today, I'm going to be sharing with you some solutions that we have created for our clients. And while I might not always be able to share a client's name or the exact products that we created for them, I will be describing why and how we blended. I just might have to hold back on some of showing of that what, because after all, we've got some top secret stuff going on around here. So with that, we're going to have some question and answer portions throughout, and I'm going to be asking for you to use some of the polling features and raising your hands. And at the end, we're going to have some time for some Q&A. So let's go ahead and get started. And I'm going to start it right now by asking you all a question. Raise your hand if your organization uses multiple modalities. So do you have a blended learning environment in your current organization right now? So I'm going to look and see who's raising hands. Wow, looks like lots of you have your hands raised. Great. I guess there's a reason why we had such a huge response rate for this webinar today. Good, good. Keep raising those hands if you are. And now what I'm going to ask you to do is keep your hand raised if you blend modalities as part of a curriculum. So that curriculum might be based on a subject matter or an employee role. So this is kind of narrowing the scope a little bit. And some of you might be putting your hands down and you don't target specific curriculums or subject matters. Okay. And now I want you to keep your hand raised or lower your hand, so that means click on it again if you need to lower it, if you utilize what we call intramodal blending, where you have multiple modalities in one single learning event. So you might blend classroom with performance support, or you might have performance support in your e-learning, but you're intramodally blending. Okay, so some of those hands started to drop. But we still have a large number of hands raised, and I'm very glad to see that. I think that you're going to find this webinar beneficial, because that was kind of my assumption of what we would be talking about today, so that's perfect. So you can all drop your hands now, and we're going to go ahead and move forward. So probably the two most frequently asked questions that we get from our clients are, when should we use blended learning, and how do we know which modality or modalities to choose? So I'm going to tackle the first question right now, and that's, when should we blend? And if you will, travel back in time with me for a bit. So in 2000, I was a facilitator at a Big 5 firm, and the course I taught brought new graduates, new college graduates into Tampa for 10 to 12 weeks in a boot camp program that was designed to teach object-oriented programming languages. And the participants stayed in corporate housing, and they were in the training center from 8:30 in the morning until 5:30 at night. And of course, there were some late night working sessions that we also had, that we would order some pizza and stay there till 9 or 10 o'clock at night. But we had lectures and assignments, and the final weeks were spent on a mock client engagement. You can imagine that the cost per the participant was pretty high, that the organization paid to bring them all into training. I wasn't privy to the budget, but I'm guessing it was likely near or exceeding $20,000. And it was common to have 70 participants in a class group, and we would have 3 class groups running simultaneously on the campus at any given moment. That sounds completely odd in today's economic climate, don't you think? I mean, just getting people in the room for 2 days is difficult enough, and getting people there for 12 weeks, I mean, it's just unheard of. But thankfully, technological advances have made it easier for us to walk away from sequestering people for 12 weeks in a classroom environment. So while blended learning works well for many situations, more often than not, people initially choose to blend when they want to reduce classroom time. And so now I'm going to ask you guys a question, and I'm going to open up a poll. And if you give me 1 second, I'll navigate over there. But did you venture into using blended learning to reduce the time spent in class? I'm going to go ahead and launch this poll right now. So you should be able to answer that. I'll give you another couple seconds and go ahead and answer yes or no. All right, it looks like we're getting pretty solid answers there. And when I mean blended learning to reduce the time, so that means that you walked away from a traditional 100% instructor-led training that you might have had in the past, and you started using e-learning, or you started blending your learning in some way, shape, or form. Okay, I'm going to close the poll now, and I'm going to share the results with you. So you'll see that about 68% of you said that yes, that was the reason that you walked away, and that's kind of what I had envisioned in my mind that the answer would be. Most people initially go, and most organizations initially go into a blended learning approach because they have the need or the desire to reduce the amount of time spent in the classroom. Okay. So I'm going to share with you an example that we had recently. And our client AutoNation, who is a car sales organization, one of the United States' largest automotive retailers, they had an existing instructor-led training course which brought their newly hired sales associates in the classroom for 3 days. The problem that they were facing was that due to a limited number of facilitators and scheduling challenges, that new hires may not have always been able to attend the instructor-led training until after they had actually hit the floor and started selling. So in essence, they were out there selling cars without having had any training whatsoever. And they also heard from leaders that when they were able to bring somebody into the classroom, that 3 days was just too long to keep these folks from selling. So the challenge that they were experiencing was how could they reduce the speed at which new hires were trained how could they increase the speed at which new hires were trained while reducing the amount of hours that were required in the classroom. And so the solution for them was an obvious solution, and that was blended learning. And just as an overview, what I mean by blended learning is mixing those multiple options that you have to deliver training. And so what we did was we worked together with AutoNation to create a solution in which the newly hired sales associates were assigned first an e-learning course upon hire, and then were scheduled to attend the instructor-led training program within the first 60 days of hire. And the benefit to the organization was really tremendous, and we have a case study for this, but they started seeing that new hires were selling more cars at a higher gross profit. They reduced the burden of keeping the learners in the classroom for 3 days, which obviously eased financial and travel costs while increasing the productivity time of the sales associates. But as an additional benefit, really what it did was it allowed the learners to practice and fail in the safe environment of e-learning. And then facilitators in the instructor-led training course found that the conversations with the participants became deeper and richer, and the learners were more willing to volunteer to participate in role plays and answer questions, because essentially they were walking in the door with the confidence of knowing the process and the sales techniques that worked well, and with a small amount of hands-on experience from selling the cars. So the facilitators of the instructor-led program could focus instead on mentoring and fine-tuning the nuances like body language and tone of voice and eye contact. They no longer had to spend time in their limited amount of time together discussing the process or the basics or some easy ways to overcome objections. They could really jump into those deeper level, higher order thinking, and it would put them basically where they were on that third day of training. So this was a win-win for both the organization and for the learners. Another reason that organizations blend is often from the sheer volume of content. So again, I'm not going to get into the science or research, but we all intuitively know that we as humans, we check out, we hit some sort of maximum capacity, and then boom, we've got information overload. So I'm going to open my next poll up to you, and I want to ask the question, do you believe that your organization or your clients that you work with frequently try to compact too much information into one event? Is that always? Is it sometimes? Is it never? Okay. I'm going to give you a couple more seconds. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close the poll and share the results with you all. So I think like only one person said never, but it's most of the time, right? This always and sometimes are pretty high, almost 50-50. And we find that as well. So you've got this mountain full of information that you want to provide to your learners, and you try to shove it all into one event because you only have them there with you for a little bit, or you only have a slight amount of time before they hit the floor and start working. So you want to get them all of the information that they need to know right out the gate, right? So now I'm going to move back over to my presentation. Blended learning, instead of trying to shove everything into one event, offers a benefit of allowing participants to learn a little bit over time. And if you think about it, it's very rare that we actually need our learners to know everything or recall every process or procedure immediately. So instead of thinking of putting all of this information in at one time, perhaps you should strive to deliver training that builds over time. So let's say that this is the starting point of somebody's career. If you determine the minimum level of skill building and information that's needed to function at a performance level that's acceptable for that moment in time. So we have this kind of scope and sequencing decision that a blended learning program can help us to solve. So when you're faced with this whole sea of stuff that employees need to know or do, you can ask yourself the question, what do they need to know now? So if you think of some content in new hire programs, let's take that as an example, is knowing the history of the organization something that a new hire needs to know on day 1 or day 15 or even day 30 for, let's say, a retail store sales associate? Probably not, but knowing how to use that point of sale system is pretty important. And knowing how to answer frequently asked questions or common questions from customers, that's probably required for days 1 through 30, but that selling skill of probing for those hidden needs, that's a more advanced skill, and that probably isn't expected from the employee when they're first hired until probably around day 30, day 90, day 60. It's out there. It's not immediately the first day out the door that they need to be probing for needs. So how do you figure that out? How do you determine what it is they need to know when? And my advice, go right to the source. So you should talk to recent learners. So these are typical learners that have been in the role. Maybe they're managers. Ask the question, what do employees need to know and do? And then follow that question by asking when. Because knowing this, you're able to stagger the learning over time, and you can do so in a time that makes sense for the learners. We helped Delta Cargo figure this out. So Delta Cargo had weeks of ILT and tons of content, but they were finding it difficult to get employees consistent training that they actually retained. So the Delta Cargo employees are those that are responsible for the transportation of millions of pieces of cargo that fly above us every day. It's a big job. But even so, there are things that they need to know immediately, like airport codes, for example. And there are levels of responsibility that are assigned over time. The guy or the girl that's there on day one is not likely going to be handling the dangerous goods. Thank goodness for that, right? Instead, they're going to be moving boxes and pallets from one location to another. So they need to know how to balance weight on a forklift so it doesn't tip over. They need to know where on the cargo floor that packages belong. So if something needs to be refrigerated, where do I put this package so that it goes to the refrigerated cargo section? And most importantly, they need to know how to stay safe. So over time, and this essence of time doesn't necessarily need to relate to any of your official organizational structures of employee development, but employees can be and should be expected to perform more advanced functions the longer that they're in the role. And if you try to deliver training that is out of scope for their day-to-day responsibilities, you're going to get that glazed look. They're not going to remember a thing that you say. They're not going to remember that interaction that you gave them. It's going to be too much to be memorable. So instead, give them learning that's appropriate to where they are in their development and where they need to be. You know, keep in mind that we all have to crawl before we can walk, except, of course, if you think about my daughter, who I swear went straight from sitting to running. So I know that we've had some questions that have been coming in through chat, and I want to be mindful of that. So, Carrie, any questions?
Hi, Angel. We do have one question. How would you distinguish blended learning from showing a video in a lecture class?
How would you, okay, so
how would you distinguish blended learning from showing a video in a lecture class?
That is a type of blending, and that's what I was referring to when I'm talking about intramodal blending. So when we're going to get to it a little bit later in this presentation, but we have different buckets of learning that we call them. And so something like a video might be a performance support, and something like an instructor-led training is probably an experiential. So what you're doing when you're showing a video inside of an instructor-led training course is you're participating in what we call intramodal blending.
Okay, great. Thanks for that. That's the only question we have right now.
Okay. So folks, keep on asking those questions, and we'll get to them, I promise. Okay. So once you know what it is that employees need to know and what they need to do and by when, you can start to pick those ingredients that are in your blend. And I'm going to open it back up to you all. I'm curious, what are the modalities in your mix? So I'm going to go ahead and open this poll for you. And you can select all that apply. The race is on, I'm telling you right now. Okay, just a couple more seconds. I'm going to go ahead and close the poll. So let me share with you all the results. So you'll see that a large portion of you all are using some classroom-based or instructor-led training. We've got some E-learning courses that comes in first, or classroom second. We've got some formal on-the-job training that's going on. We've got some coaching and mentoring, and we've got some performance support tools. So these are but it's in real time, it's on the floor, it's in their environment, it's not pulled out necessarily and running through scenarios and practicing failure, but it's in real time. And also social networking. So you could build this community of practice. You could have wikis. You could have a method for sharing these best practices and really joining together learners who have a unique and collective set of needs that they can talk through with one another. We talked about it through the question, and I also talked about it at the beginning, but I just want to reinforce that these, even though they're separate buckets when I'm explaining them, they can be blended together. Right? So you might have an e-learning course that has performance support tools that the learners can download and access later. You might be in an instructor-led training like the question was and showing a video. And you can really have the power of a lot of different modalities in one event. So it's not that they're structured that one is in front of the other or that they're completely separate. So I want to share another example with you. We partnered with an organization who was interested in doing this entire blend of informational, experiential, and performance support modalities. And the client was moving toward a Lean Six Sigma type of a process for managing their continuous improvement projects. And if you're familiar at all with Lean processing, then you know that there are many new terms and templates that someone would need to know, and likely there's an entire change management effort that's taking place at the same time. Because this Lean process is so radically different than project management efforts in the past that there has to be an element of kind of change management that buckets and envelopes the entire program. So we worked with this organization to identify what belonged in the informational bucket, what belonged in the experiential bucket, and what were best as performance support tools. So one of the things that we did for them was once a project manager was selected to move to this new Lean project, he or she was sent a series of these informational newsletters. And newsletters contained information about how to manage the transition to a Lean process. The newsletters contained blog-like entries from the folks in the field who had recently made the change. We had links to videos from panels of experts. We had scoured the industry and had hand-selected some readings or case studies that were thought-provoking. We also had self-raters, like the magazine type of self-assessments where you could rate how you stood within a specific competency, and then you could find information to help build that. But there were practical tips on how to manage this transition. And this is 100% informational. It was located in a central area where they could easily access it and return for future reference. The next thing that we did for them was we also created and helped them determine what needed to be in the experiential learning. So we developed a series of e-learning, scenario-based e-learning courses, and we had them practice some of the filling out the templates and some of the things that they might be doing in real life in this environment of virtual instructor-led, and in the environment of e-learning. And then once they were finished with the e-learning courses, they attended a virtual instructor-led event. So instead of bringing them to a classroom, they launched a webinar similar to this, but it was an actual classroom where there was breakout rooms and there was whiteboards and things that they could do independently and as groups, and the facilitator was able to do a lot of the things that you would do typically in an instructor-led training course, but it was virtually. And what it did was it allowed them to use that e-learning as building and practicing the skills, and then in the virtual instructor-led training, they literally started filling out the project documentation that they would be doing, and they got feedback and input from their peers. They got feedback and input from the facilitator that was there leading that virtual instructor-led training session. And they were able to give feedback and guidance along the way. In between those courses that we built, the learners had access to new performance support tools, and these performance support tools, we aligned them to where they were in their understanding. So there were templates and there were how-to guides, there were scheduled meetings with a mentor, there was even, we built this online tracker that you see here on screen, and it just basically gave them a virtual checklist of all the tools and all the learning objects that they had access to at their specific stage in their own development. So as they progressed through their learning, there was new resources that were available to them, and they would be able to check these off, and they would know what was expected of them, and they would know what the new training events were that were available to them in this huge blended learning campaign that we were able to do for them. The learners were appreciative because they had, spaced and sequenced and scoped out the learning so that we were not bombarding them with everything that they ever needed to know about this very complex process management system that they would now be using. They were able to kind of stair-step or scaffold their knowledge and their learning throughout time. And it was really, really helpful for the learners and for the organization because it allowed them the opportunity to check in regularly with their learners to make sure that there was not a gap that they needed to be addressing. And it was really comforting for the learners to be able to return back to this tracker and have everything in the place that they needed it to be. So I know that we've also been getting some more questions in on the chat. I've been seeing it flash about. So Carrie, do we have some questions out there?
Hi, Angel. Yes, we do have some questions. Okay, so the first question is from Joe, and he's asking, his question is, so do you put some of the content from the informational newsletters into the performance support tool?
Yes. So the answer for that specific question that we have there about the process that we followed was in that tracker that you saw in that performance support tool. There would be links to those e-newsletters that they had. But the way that this organization decided to do it was they were emailing their participants, here's the latest newsletter that's available to you. Go ahead and click on this link and you can access it. And then once they got into that performance support tool, that tracker that we built for them, there was also a hyperlink to that e-newsletter. But they did do a push campaign where they actually pushed it out via email because they wanted the learners to go through those e-newsletters.
Okay, great. Another question was, what software was used for the virtual instructor-led training that you were talking about?
They used a product called Adobe Connect for theirs, but there's a number of different product on the market that you can use for the virtual instructor-led training.
Okay. The next question is, can you provide an example of experiential learning? That was from John.
Okay, so John, experiential learning might be an instructor-led training course. So, for example, I just returned from Fort Lauderdale where I was helping AutoNation with their next course that they're building. And we have two experiential learning events that we're blending together. One is the e-learning course. And in the e-learning course, what we're doing is we're having people go through and learn about their inventory that they might have and learn about ways to get to know this inventory better and ways to use this information in their sales process. And then when they come into the classroom for the 4-hour training that they're going to be having, what the facilitator is going to be doing is asking them to role play. We have a potential buyer that's in the car in the room with them who's looking for a used car, and then we have somebody that's acting as the sales associate, and we walk them through the entire sales process step by step. So it's really kind of a simulated sales environment, sales call environment. That's why we call it experiential, because they're actually experiencing something in a safe environment that they would be experiencing out on the floor when they're actually selling. Any other questions, Carrie?
Okay, great. Yeah, one more question. How do you measure change in behavior performance and metrics that we would use to do that?
Right. So this is a great question to ask because I always think that you should be looking to measure the benefits of this. And my advice to you is find what's currently being measured. What are they currently being judged on? So AutoNation, again, is our perfect example for this because they already were measuring certain business key performance indicators, right? So they could see the amount of time that an employee was on the job, right? So that's their turnover. So they were measuring turnover. Secondly, they could see the number of vehicles that were sold based on that employee, and they could see the profit retained for that vehicle. And so their goal was to sell more cars at a higher profit and keep their employees with them for a longer amount of time. So they had all this base level of knowledge that they had already been collecting about their store sales associates. And then when we rolled out the new learning program, we were able to do a control group and a pilot group so that we could eliminate things like, well, there's a change in the economy, or this person has a better manager or leader. We had 2 people from the same store hired at the same time go through. One person went through the pilot, one person went through the typical standard approach, and we were able to compare their metrics without any of the other issues that you might run into. So if your organization doesn't already capture these metrics, what are they basing the employee performance on now? What are they looking to improve? And if you can, when you're actually in the design phase before you do the rollout, start tracking that stuff now. Start figuring out what the current state is and get that in a way that you can track it and look at today, because then you can compare with what it is in the future when you launch it. One of the worst things that we try to do is we try to say, look, things are better, but we don't have a baseline for which we're saying that things are better, that people are happier, or that they're more productive, or that they're selling more. And if you don't have a baseline, it's hard to say that it was actually the result of the training. So you want to put measurement out there early and then measure those specific same things later. And it's always good if the business already has these metrics in place, because then they're accepted by the stakeholders within the organization. So those folks that are higher up saying, you guys just created your own new measurement system, that doesn't really mean anything. But if they're tied to real key performance indicators within the business, that's the utopia of measurement. Okay.
Okay, great. There are a few other questions, but why don't you go on and then we can save those for the end.
Okay, perfect. So we know now kind of how to blend. We've talked about what's available in it, but like any great meal, and we're keeping it on the theme of mixing it up, quality ingredients are very important. So regardless of whatever modality is that you choose, for the sake of the learner and in order to get the best results, we believe that you should follow some basic instructional design philosophy that we have here called meaningful, memorable, and motivational. And meaningful, what does this mean about meaningful? It means that your learning needs to resonate with your audience. It needs to be realistic, right? So they need to see themselves in this training, in this scenario. They need to say that this was developed or designed or written by somebody that understands what it is that they do. It's meaningful to them. Memorable. When learners need to perform the task in real life, they should be able to remember what those consequences are of the actions that they took in your learning. So when they're called upon to do something in real life, they should be able to remember what happened in training. And that means they could either want to emulate that and say, wow, I was really successful in that scenario I was placed in, or man, I really bombed that scenario. I want to do everything I can to avoid making those same mistakes again. And motivational. Now, motivational comes in a few ways, and it doesn't mean rah, 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 great job, you're doing wonderful, but rather that learners are motivated to continue in this training because they see the benefit of taking the time to do so. So they understand that you as an organization have put together a program that will help them in their real world. And it also means that when you've done this right, that they're going to be motivated to take future training that you put out there. So good builds upon good, builds upon good. So once they've been accustomed to that horrible, awful training that's out there, you're going to have to bridge that gap and bring them up. And once they see that you've done that and you have created something that's worthwhile of their time, they're motivated to see what comes next, right? So in order to do that, we have our instructional design principles. And these are context, challenge, activity, and feedback. And what that means is contexts need to be realistic. We're not talking about Candyland metaphors or Jeopardy in a sales training course. They need to be selling products with a customer in front of them if that's what they're required to do. And challenges should mirror the challenges that they have in real life. No one comes up to a car salesperson and says, when overcoming objections from a client, what's the first thing that you should do? Is it A? Is it B? Is it C? No. The challenge is a statement from a customer and how you're going to respond to it. What words are you going to use to overcome that? The activity is how your learners are going to be performing the challenge. If this is e-learning, how are they going to be selecting the answer? Are they going to be participating in a simulation of a process? What is it that they're going to be doing? Are they typing? Are they dragging an answer? Whatever that might be. If this is instructor-led training, will it be a role play with a peer? Will it be a flip chart exercise? What is it that we want the learners to be doing in order to successfully achieve that challenge? And then comes the feedback or consequences. And this is where real learning occurs, from the feedback. So what are the consequences of the action that you took in relation to the challenge that you were given? Did your customer accept that response to their objection? Did they get up and walk away? What happens when you press a button on your POS system that wasn't the button that you intended to push, and now you've given somebody the steak when they ordered a hamburger? Are they upset? Did your organization lose money because you had waste? Consequences are how we learn. We learn from our mistakes, from the challenges that we face every day in our life. And we should, as instructional designers and developers, allow our learners the opportunity to do that in the safe environment of training, rather than having them put, a bunch of bullets on screen, go through those bullets on screen, answer some multiple choice questions, and then risk them making those mistakes in the real world. That's the scary part. So really the greatest benefit of a blended learning program, in my opinion at least, is that you have the opportunity to deliver training that drives performance change. So blending learning allows you to focus on performance, not on content, because you're freed up now. You can put those informations in an information delivery mechanism that makes sense for the learner. And you can focus that limited amount of time that you actually have them in training on the stuff that they need to be doing. And it needs to be meaningful, it needs to be memorable, and it needs to be motivational. And so with that, I'm going to open it back up again to the questions that we have.
Okay, Jill, here's a question. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay. So how do you determine which kinds of practice scenarios to build into experiential e-learning versus what to practice in an instructor-led training piece? That question is from Jack.
Okay, so if we're talking about what we should put in e-learning versus what we should put in ILT, because they're both experiential. So scenarios that belong in the ILT should focus on the things that you're in the instructor-led training, should focus on the things that you need to have the facilitator there to help give you feedback on. So, for example, you might have eye contact is a big thing, body language is a big thing, the rate at which you speak is a big thing. So these kinds of soft nonverbal communication, while you can emulate them on screen in an e-learning environment, you're not necessarily able to have the person in the room practicing it with you. So how I say things and how I respond and react is a dance between the person that I'm talking to. So those kinds of things are great to put into an e-learning, or I'm sorry, into an instructor-led training course. One client that we're working on right now really wanted to create a playbook, a successful playbook, when their learners came out of the instructor-led training together. And what they were using is what's called a leader standard of work. So as the learners go through the instructor-led training together, they're literally filling out the items on this leader standard of work, and they're getting input from that person in the room with them. The thing that you want to put in e-learning, you want them to practice those scenarios, you want them to make mistakes with them, and I always like putting e-learning first, not so that I can bombard them with information, but because we have introverts that are out there, right? And so they might not want to participate in role play immediately out the gate. Allow them the opportunity to do that in a safe environment where nobody's watching, where they could try to choose a couple of different answers and get feedback. It builds their confidence. When they come in the room then, they're more confident, they've seen this material before, they have a context by which to ask questions in. So the value of having e-learning first and ILT next is that it allows for learners to avoid having that moment when they get back out of training and go, man, if only I would have known to ask this question when I was in that room, because it would have been so valuable to hear what my peers were doing or what my instructor was doing. it builds a context. It seeds the well, if you will, for the employees to walk in the room ready to start to perform.
Okay, great. Thanks, Angel.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, my screen is moving. So, let's see. Can you speak to wraparound training, training to take away on-the-job tools?
Training to take away on the job. Well, what I'm assuming that you mean are the ways that we can give people training when they actually hit back onto the floor again. So that might be that you have a peer or a mentor who is working and assigned with somebody, or you might have specific on-the-job training moments. So an example of what we've done with this are leader huddles, kind of kicking things off with their employees that we have them meet for 15 minutes and talk about a specific topic, or give an opportunity to have a role play real quick in front of everybody and then give some feedback on that, so involving the leaders that are there. Other things that we've done for real on-the-job kind of performance support tools is have like the videos or some sort of on-demand, just-in-time kind of resource that somebody could go out and access. Let's say I'm stuck in a computer screen that I don't know how to get out of. If I have an on-the-job performance support tool that's embedded into that software program, I will be able to go and access that and look at it. Or if I know where to find that information, let's say it's on my SharePoint site, then I can go back and I can watch how somebody navigates through a certain screen, or I can print out a guide or a performance support tool that helps me navigate through this screen.
Okay, next question. Can you recommend resources or process for developing scenarios and case studies?
So scenarios, I always find that you have to go to the source. It would be silly for us as instructional designers who often sit behind a keyboard and do lots of reading and writing to think that we actually know what it's like to feel the pressure of having a customer in front of us. A good example of this is we have some of our clients that actually fix the road, the guardrails that are out on the side of the road. And I literally went out there and followed and shadowed and stood on the side of a hot Florida road while cars were driving by at 70 miles per hour, and I talked to the guy about what is it that you're looking to do, what are you working on, and asking the learners for the inputs rather than thinking that we can come up with our own scenarios. Now, if you don't have the luxury of going out and standing on the side of the road, see if you can send them over a document. We have what we call content gathering documents, where we come up with scenarios and we ask for learner input, real learner input, because they know what the context is. They know what the challenge is. They know what the customer says when you respond in a certain way. They are the ones that will make your learning so much more meaningful. We have an entire process that we do to get this. It's called SAM. We start with a savvy start. We have learners in there. We ask all these questions and we come up with what that interaction looks like and what that moment looks like. But when we actually come to writing it, so building out that content, there is no better source than the learners, or perhaps if you have to go one step away from that, and that's their managers who may have been in this position just shortly before they entered that new role. But really go straight to the source to help build those scenarios.
Okay, great. Thanks, Angel. Another question is, where does a train-the-trainer effort fit into the blended delivery? Clarification. I ask this because so Lynn is asking this. Lynn asked this because their preparation needs to escalate their proficiency to readdress many of the learning scenarios day to day.
Right. So train-the-trainers are a vital part of the experiential learning event, because especially if you have the same facilitators who may not be delivering training that way. So they might be used to very much scripted facilitator guides. You show this screen on your PowerPoint, you say these points, you ask this question, you're expecting these response, and then you move forward to the next one. When you have something like this scenario-driven instructor-led training where they're almost like a mentor or a coach, you really have to upskill your facilitators if they're not already there. They need to become almost experts be able to answer the questions. And if they're not, perhaps they could have somebody in the room who can act in that role, in that capacity. So the facilitator could do things like deliver, you might still have presentation, PowerPoints, you might still have things that you're expected to do and say in this instructor-led training, but when it comes to answering those higher order type of questions, you might need to call on a mentor or a person who's well experienced in this, a subject matter expert. So having maybe that extra person in the room, even if it's only for an hour here or an hour there, would be greatly beneficial. But train the trainers are really vital. You need to run through any role plays and scenarios in totality. You need to act like you're a learner. You need to potentially pilot this and bring in learners as you're designing it and developing it. We always stress to have learners involved with you as you design and develop courses, whether that's e-learning or ILT, and run through these scenarios with them, prototyping them out to make sure that they make the most sense, and then bringing your facilitators up to speed. I have found involve the facilitators that you're going to be having with you, or at least one of them from the start, because they know the questions that learners ask. They know the environment in which they're placed. You can't necessarily ask for them to have 8 flip charts across the room because there's just not enough space in there. So have a facilitator there if you're designing instructor-led training from the start, and have them bring you back to reality.
So from your experience, this is a question from Helen, from your experience, what is more effective, virtual or classroom instructor-led training?
That's a tough question to ask because it really depends on the content. If physical location needs to be there, if you need to see, and goes back to my body language thing, if you need to see reactions and experience reactions on a kind of micro expression level, so if you need to really see what somebody's body language is, it's kind of difficult. I mean, I know we have webcams, but there is that synergy and that energy and that vibe that you can pick up on that you can't pick up on necessarily on a VILT. So if you're talking about a very soft skill, I would personally recommend bringing them into a room together. If you're talking about like what I was talking about with our client that we helped with the lean process, if you're talking about how to fill out documentation, how to address your peer group, how to run meetings, those kinds of more tactical questions, then I think virtual instructor-led training works just as well.
Okay, great. A question from Rebecca. She says, what about having learners take e-learning in the classroom and then being debriefed with an instructor?
Yes, that's definitely an option. And in fact, I am right now working on a project that we do that. So we have a 3-day course that we've developed, and at various moments throughout the course, we have learners go and take a scenario in e-learning. It's 10-15 minutes that they're running through, and it might be that they're manipulating something that is kind of an abstract concept. So for our case, they might have to arrange things in a certain order, or they might have to run through specific capacity worksheets, and that's the course that I'm working on right now. But it's a great practice to have people take a break, go practice something in a safe environment of e-learning, again, making the mistakes there, and then debriefing and potentially running through one of those role plays or scenarios after they've already been given that initial kind of heads up and ability to practice. So that kind of intramodal blending is great. It works wonderfully.
Okay, this is a long question, so here we go. This is from Shannon. How do you resolve the issues of individuals who come to instructor-led training having not done their pre-work or case scenarios? Our learners have to enter applications on a system we use in our organization, and they're expected to enter 4 to 6 applications prior to coming to the training. It is often clear that some come to the training having never done their pre-work, which takes up valuable time to get them up to speed. We currently have no method of tracking that these activities are completed because they are done in a training environment on an antiquated mainframe system and done by possibly hundreds of new employees per month in multiple locations around the state.
Okay, so that's a challenge that's not unique to you, so I'll let you know that, is that when people don't complete the pre-work. And if you can, track it. Obviously, you can't track it. So here's what you have to do. You have to have some sort of mechanism by which that you send them over to get some of the stuff done, or you're going to have to dumb down the training to a level where you're going to be explaining this process. And it's a logistical nightmare, and I understand that there's lots of complications that go in it. But if something is absolutely certain that it needs to be done as pre-work in order to get everybody at a level set, I literally have had clients that have turned people out of the door and said that you can't come into this training until you've done this pre-work, and you're going to have to go sit and complete this, and then you can catch up. But it's not a fun situation, and I feel bad that you can't track where they're at. You can have the facilitators reach out and send reminders, perhaps, that it's vital that they do it, maybe in the evening on the first day or on a break that they can start to catch up. But it really needs to be a communication effort, and there really needs to be an emphasis put on that. And I think that brings us to the end of our time together, so I want to be cognizant of everybody's time.
Yes, we're to the top of the hour. So
yes.
Yeah, I just wanted to cover a few closing items to make you aware of some resources we have available on our site. Angel, if you could advance the screen, thanks.
Yes.
So we have a lot of resources on our site for creating meaningful, memorable, motivational learning, our blog, white papers, demos. Go to alleninteractions.com/resources. And then also, she had mentioned several times the AutoNation blended solution we created. We have a case study on that. You can download that at the website address. Brittany can also put that in the chat window for everybody. And then we also have, as a way of saying thank you for all of you attending, we're offering a 30-day free trial to our authoring system, ZebraZaps. ZebraZaps offers authors the power and flexibility to build experiential learning that is meaningful, memorable, and motivational. So hope you take advantage of that 30-day free trial. And thank you again, everybody, for sticking with us through the hour. And have a great rest of the day and week and weekend. We really appreciate it. Hope to see you on a future webinar. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you all.
Thanks, Angel. Thanks for everything.
Of course.